Hey there, Nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with another episode of Way of the Underhive. This is a series that's dedicated to showing you players how to play Necromunda and how to set up campaigns and to create your very first gangs. And on today's episode, this one's actually kind of a special episode because I've been getting a lot of feedback from my viewers, and a lot of you guys have been asking questions about how to run a campaign for the very first time, or questions about campaign game mechanics and rules and all kinds of stuff. And I actually put out a poll recently on my channel asking if you, the viewers, would like to see a video on how to run a Necromunda campaign as an arbitrator. Needless to say, I got an overwhelmingly positive result on the votes on that one, so a lot of you out there are really interested in how to run a campaign. So if you want to be a campaign arbitrator, this is the video for you. And the only question I have to ask you is, are you sure? Are you really sure? Because if you are, good. Because being a campaign arbitrator is a lot of fun, and setting up a Necromunda campaign can be one of the most rewarding gaming experiences that you can actually have. I've played Necromunda for a very long time, ever since it first came out in the mid-90s. I played it as both a player as well as a campaign arbitrator. I've been on both sides of it, and I've run numerous campaigns as well as games, and so I got a little bit of interesting feedback and experience with this, and I'm going to share a lot of that information with you guys today, so that way you guys can set up your very first campaign as an arbitrator as well. So that being said, let's go ahead and get this video on a roll. So just to give you guys an idea exactly what this video will be talking about, I have 5 main points that we'll be discussing about creating a campaign for Necromunda. We'll be talking about the players and how you should treat different players and how to set up their gangs and stuff like that, and how to make sure they stay involved in your campaign. Another thing we'll be talking about, of course, are scheduling as well as data tracking for your campaign as well, so that's a very important part as well. Number 4 is going to be whatever potential issues that you might run into as well, and then lastly we'll give my final thoughts about running a campaign. And since this video is a little bit more of a deeper dive into actually running a campaign, I will put timestamps down below to the various sections about running a campaign. So for whatever part that interests you the most, or the things you have questions about, you can just kind of click and choose as you want to and navigate the video accordingly. So that being said, let's go ahead and talk about setting up your campaign. So the very first thing I usually ask a player if they want to actually set up a Necromunda campaign, the very first thing I ask them are, how experienced are you as a miniatures wargamer? Have you played in campaigns before? Have you ever arbitrated one before? Have you been a game master before? How familiar are you with different game mechanics? And based on the answer that I get from players, will usually kind of depend on how you want to go about setting up your campaign. For example, if you're an experienced player, you can take your campaign as far as and in depth as you want to, because chances are you have a pretty good idea exactly how the game mechanics works of a Necromunda campaign. However, though, if you're a novice, you may not want to do so. You might want to kind of back off a little bit. You might want to keep it small or simple, or whatever the case may be, and that's just a good idea of how to do things. Keeping it simple in a campaign is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with making your campaign very, very basic. Necromunda has a lot of things going on in it. There's a lot of rules for campaign rules, a lot of rules for gangs, as well as alliances and game mechanics and weapons and equipment and skills. I mean, it can get quite in depth if you actually let this thing could actually devour your whole life if you're not careful about it. So keeping it simple is nothing wrong with doing that whatsoever. Then also, you could really start off really basic if you want to, and as time goes on in your campaign, you can ramp up the complexity of your campaign as time goes on. So as you guys are getting more comfortable with the rules, as your players are getting more comfortable with actually playing the game, you can then add more and more layers of difficulty or advancement to your campaign as you want to. For example, when we first did my Necromunda Underhive Wars campaign on my channel, when we actually took the very brand new re-release of the game and actually made our very first campaign, we kept it very, very simple. If you go back in those videos, you realize this is how simple it really was. We just used the core house gangs, their equipment, and their skills. Very, very simple. For example, tactics. We didn't use gang tactics at all in that very first campaign, just for a couple of reasons. One, we didn't have access to the tactic cards at the time, because those things were notoriously difficult to get your hands on, and also pricey, I might add. And lastly, because we were just trying to get our heads wrapped around how to do scenarios and actually how to play the game, let alone throwing tactics on there. So because if you want to keep things out of your game to keep it simple, that is perfectly fine. It's always a good idea to kind of get an idea of what you want to do for your campaign, so that way you can figure out how you want to play it from that point as well. So with that, let's keep on going about talking about some more about some things you got to think about when you're setting up your campaign. Now, when you're setting up your campaign, another question you might want to ask yourself is what kind of campaign do you want to play? Because depending on what kind of style of campaign system you want to use for Necromunda will have a big impact on what you need to do for your players, how to track things, the data that you need to keep track of, that sort of thing. For example, the most common type of campaign that's out there that a lot of players play is your good old-fashioned Dominion campaign. In a Dominion campaign, gangs fight for territories, and what determines who wins the overall campaign is usually built on reputation points. That's an example of how one game mechanic works. If you're playing like in a law and misrule campaign, that one's a little bit different because you're fighting for different criminal trades as well as different criminal syndicates, and so there's a lot of game mechanics involved in that one, such as law-abiding versus outlaw statuses. So those are some examples of how the campaigns can be kind of different. In this video, I'm just going to assume that you're trying to start off with the very first basic one, which is a Dominion campaign, and that's how I'm going to reflect about how this video kind of goes. If you want, of course, other videos about different campaigns, just let me know in the comments down below, and I'll make videos about that as well. Another question you need to ask yourself is how many players are you going to be planning on you having in your campaign as well, because the number of players will usually determine how difficult it will be for you to track the campaign as well. If you're a brand new player and you got just a handful of friends, like say 4 of you want to play a campaign, that's perfectly fine. I've actually taken part in campaigns that had 30 players in one campaign before, and that was absolutely insane. I wasn't the one arbitrating that, I was just a player at the time, but the arbitrators of that campaign, had to do a lot of tracking, so that just kind of, keep that in mind when that comes into play. You probably want to start off small if you're brand new to a campaign system, because it's easier to track, but if you're up for the challenge or you think I got this, by all means, put as many players as you want. Another question you might have to ask yourself is what kind of time frame you're talking about. So timing is very important, especially in a campaign system. Are you dedicating a couple of weeks to it? Are you planning on playing it over the course of a year? How many times per week are you planning on playing this game? That sort of thing as well. Because you don't want your campaign to be so long that people lose interest in it and become bored with it and they start dropping out. But at the same time, you don't want to make it too small of a time frame either, just because you don't want people to be burnt out from playing the game. So that's another thing you got to keep into consideration as well. Games Workshop and their rule set suggest that you actually have 7 weeks to do a campaign, 3 weeks for the first half of the campaign, a week of downtime, and then 3 weeks for the second half of the campaign. That's perfectly fine. On my channel, we actually are very casual war gamers, so because that we can spend a large amount of time doing our campaign. For example, our Underhive Wars campaign that we first did on my channel took 1.5 years to do, and that's just because we're casual players and we were just meeting up whenever we could to play it. So that's another thing you got to keep in mind as well. Another question that you need to ask yourself too is, of course, is where you're going to be playing these games at. What venue would you plan on doing it? Are you actually going to meet at one common spot for all your players to play together, or are you going to be hosting at your place, or are you guys going to have your players just play on their own and they just give you information? Up to you how you want to do it. So that's another thing you need to keep in mind too, is what venue you plan on using for your campaign. So once you answer all these questions for yourself, then you got a pretty good idea exactly what kind of campaign you want to have, how many players you'll get, how long you're planning on doing it, and where you'll be playing at. Once you have those questions answered, then you can start actually brainstorming your campaign, and then of course you pitch it to your players. And that brings us to the next section where we actually talk about the players that will be participating in your campaign. Alright, so let's go and talk about your campaign with your players. The first thing you want to do is, once you got your campaign set up, you want to host a meeting of some sort. And a bonus point, snacks are always a good thing to have. For example, whenever I and my friends want to do a campaign together, we meet at my place, I order some pizzas, we drink, we eat, we talk about exactly what we want to plan, and we can go ahead and start planning out our entire campaign from there. Now, it's also nice to have this campaign meeting because it also sets the tone of what you're looking for in your campaign. And this is where you basically discuss with your players things like, exactly what kind of campaign you want to create and what you want them to play. Things like addressing rules, for example, for the campaign. So for example, if there's some kind of rule differentiation or some kind of conflict with the rules, you can address exactly how you're going to host it in your campaign, for example. You can also talk about various game mechanics, etc. This will also be the same time that your players will actually make up their gangs as well and create their rosters. So that way you can start talking about it and pretty much just kind of generate the buzz for people to actually start, getting really excited about playing in the game as well. This is also a good idea to kind of set like your rules and expectations of what exactly you're expecting in this campaign. Things like how often you plan on your players on playing this game, how often will they meet up to play, where they'll be playing at, that sort of thing. And it's kind of a good idea to kind of set the tone on this one. So that way that your players know exactly what to expect in your campaign as it fully develops. Now, when it comes to your players will be the largest variable in your campaign, okay? Because, they're people, and people, as you may know, are very different between different personalities, what kind of things they're interested in, that kind of thing as well. You could set up a perfect campaign, but if you have players who are not interested in playing it whatsoever, it could have a negative effect on your campaign, for example. So because of that, since your players are the largest variable that you'll have to deal with when running a campaign, there's a couple of things you want to keep in mind when you're making your campaign and when you're dealing with your players. The first one, of course, is commitment as well as honesty. If you plan on having a campaign, you want to make sure you have players who will be committed to it and playing in the time frame that you're allowing them that you want to run your campaign in. So, for example, if you want to run, let's say you plan on all meeting at your local game store every Wednesday, for example, Wednesday evening, and you're going to play that, and that's how you're going to do it. Make sure you get players who will, do that, or find a time frame that works best for them. Last thing you want to do is actually have a player kind of flakes out on you. You can't rely upon them to play on the campaign. I mean, that's one of the things as well. At the same time, you want to also make sure that you're playing with players who are honest as well. As a campaign arbitrator, you're putting a lot of trust in your players to making sure that they're actually playing the game correctly, that they're following the rules, that they're not cheating, for example. So that's a really big thing as well. Now, at the same time, as players will expect certain things from you as the arbitrator as well. It's very much a relationship between the campaign arbitrator as well as the player. So communication is super important during a campaign as well. So for example, things like rule changes or things that you want to draw attention to. So for example, let's say that you want your players to meet up at certain times, or you want to give information about how their gangs are progressing overall the campaign. Communication is super important. In my opinion, you should get contact information from all your players. Preferably email is probably the best way to do this. That way you can send them copies of rosters or copies of information about what's going on in your campaign, so that way they can get that information so everyone's on the same page. It's kind of corny to say it, but setting up like a weekly newsletter during your campaign to your players, informing them what's happening overall, great way to actually get that information out to your players as well. At the same time, this is probably the most important thing I could probably say to you. Trust your players. And if you trust your players, more often than not, your players will also trust you as well, okay? Trust them to make the good calls, trust them that they'll be committed, trust them they'll be honest, trust them that they'll communicate to you, and you do the same thing for them, and it's a good relationship. Like I said, anybody's ever played role-playing games before knows exactly what I'm talking about in terms of making sure that you have that positive relationship with your game master, and that as a game master, or in this case an arbitrator, you have a positive relationship with your players. Because at the end of the day, you guys want to have fun. You don't want to create all kinds of unwanted drama when you're playing a campaign. So that's something you want to keep in mind when that goes into it. So that's why communication is so important for your players as well. So now that we're done talking about things that you can expect from your players and save your campaign, next thing we're going to talk about is scheduling as well as data tracking. Alright, so this section I like to call organization or death, because being organized is going to be extremely important as a campaign arbitrator. Staying organized, keeping track of data, kind of like part and parcel of what it is to run a Necromunda campaign. Now, when it comes to scheduling, there's pretty much two different ways you can go about doing this for your players to play one against each other. Traditionally speaking, you can either do what's called a round robin, or you can do a sandbox style of playing. So what is a round robin? A round robin is where you actually track all the players and actually schedule players to actually fight against each other on a one-to-one basis. So for example, let's say you have 6 gangs participating in your campaign. Every single one of your players will fight every single other gang in your campaign setting at least once. Okay, that's why it's called a round robin type of situation. Round robins are nice because it gives a lot of structure to a campaign, and players know exactly who they're playing and when they'll be playing against them, and you could actually schedule times for them to do this, so that way it makes it a little bit easier for them. That way players aren't scrambling around trying to figure out when's the best time for them to play and so forth. Now, there are some negatives to a round robin. For example, round robins traditionally are very inflexible, and since in a campaign of Necromunda, previous games impact future games, maintaining a round robin is very, very structured and very strict in that sense, because you really can't move on until you play another fight beforehand. So let's say, for example, you have a Kaldar player who's supposed to play a Goliath player, but for whatever reason they don't play that game and they're expected to play an Escher gang next. You really can't proceed any further because they got to fight that fight first, so that way they can gain experience and skills and all that kind of stuff. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Now, a sandbox method is kind of nice as well. A sandbox method is typically where you tell your players, okay, you have a week for example, to play your battles. So what ends up happening is that your players, within a span of a week, it's up to them to actually meet up, play their games, track their information down, and then keep on playing that way during that week. Now, a sandbox method is not as structured as a round robin because it's up to your individual players at what time they want to play and how they want to do so. But it's entirely up to you. Like I said before, as much more flexible than a round robin, but then again, you might have situations come up where some players might not play other players because of X, Y, and Z reasons. So there's positives and negatives to both. And so that's the important thing you need to worry about. Now, another thing you need to do, of course, as a campaign arbitrator is that you're responsible for tracking data for your games as well. Now, once again, your data tracking will be dependent upon the type of campaign that you're playing. For example, the data that you track in a Dominion campaign will be very different from a Law and Misrule campaign, for example. Now, regardless of what you do, spreadsheets on your laptop or your desktop or however you want to use it, spreadsheets are perfect for this because you can keep a track of all that data and keep it on one kind of location. You can send that data to your fellow players so that way they know what's going on. At the same time, things like campaign data will be things that you're tracking, so like how many kills a gang has accrued or how many territories they have or reputation. At the same time, you can also track player data as well, like by tracking their rosters and all that kind of information, which could be really good. So that way, the reason why you might want to track a player's data for their gang is so that way you can keep players honest, like keeping an honest man honest type of thing. Because, you know, there is some temptation. Some players do like to cheat, and by tracking player data on the stats of their gang, you can prevent that from happening. So that's something you want to keep in mind when you're playing when you're scheduling and tracking data like that. Now, irregardless of what system you choose, whether you decide to do a sandbox method or a round robin method, probably the most important tool that I can recommend as an arbitrator is to do what I like to call an after-action report. After-action reports are, well, as they say, reports that usually military units use after they accomplish a mission or they go into combat or the situation may be. What they do is after they do their mission, what they do is they reflect upon what happened during that mission, talk about the positives and negatives and what they can learn from whatever mistakes or positives that they had to, you know, later on impact future missions. And so doing an after action report for your players is extremely important. This kind of gives them a buy-in for your players. Like, if you're going to be tracking their data, they have to do something to help you out. So when it comes to the individual tracking of the data of their gangs, I usually have my players give me something really simple like this. It's just a simple Word document. It says what gang it is in, what player is it, and things that they track are which of their fighters have injuries, so they put that information down. If any of their players had advanced with experience points, what kind of advancements do their gangs have? If there's been training in territories, what kind of territories have they gained or lost? How much credits they made from their territories, for example. At the training post, what did they purchase for their gang? What kind of money did they make? That sort of thing. Also, when it comes to reputation, have they gained or lost reputation over time? When it comes to the new record, we're talking about their win-loss or draw record. So how many wins have they had? How many losses that they've had? If they have any draws? And lastly, what is their overall gang rating as well? So have your players track this information as they play their gangs and have them submit that information to you so that way you can keep track of their data. It gives your players a buy-in to keep track of this information as well, so it's not entirely on you. At the same time, you could also making sure that they're keeping themselves honest and they're not cheating. At the same time, they also should expect for you to take this information and to record it somewhere, because if they're going to take time to record this information, then you should be able to present it back to them in case they forget. Because sometimes players lose rosters, sometimes players forget things, and if you can bring this information back to them, then you realize, okay, we're kind of sharing the load on the data tracking, which is really good. Like I said, that relationship between players and arbitrators is very, very important. It's very much a relationship, and you guys got to be able to trust each other and have a lot of give and take on that one. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. So another question that usually pops up is like, okay, great. So now I got to track all this data, Commander Cheapskate. How do I go about doing that? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because what I'm going to do in this next little section here, I'm actually going to go back to my desktop and I'm actually going to do a screenshot of my desktop. I'm actually going to show you some examples of some documents that I've used and some kind of spreadsheets I've used to track data in previous campaigns of Necromunda that I've run on this channel. So that way you can see exactly how I go about doing it. Now, this may or may not work for you because, you know, depending on your personality or depending on how you like to keep track of things. This is just a way of me showing you how I do it, just because I'm a little bit more structured when it comes to my campaigns. So if this works for you, great, you can use it. If it doesn't work for you, find whatever works best. So with that being said, let's go and show you my examples of what I do for my channel. As you can see, we're on my desktop for my Mac. As you can see my beautiful little icon that I have here. So what I'm going to show you guys are some examples of some ways that I've done data tracking for my players over time. So let's go and start with the very first one. So this right here is actually a document, OpenOffice document that I use because OpenOffice is free because I'm a cheapskate in real life as well. And as you can see, this is my Underhive Wars Dominion campaign. So this is an example of what I was talking about, like how you can go about tracking data for your players. And what I do is I just make a real simple table on a word processor, kind of like this. As you can see, I have a number listed for all the single gangs. So in this situation, we had 12 gangs that participate in this campaign, and I assign them all a number. This is kind of important because sometimes some game mechanics in the campaign will tell you that, for example, let's say you have a gambling den, for example, for a territory for a player. And in that game system, if you actually draw a Joker card, what ends up happening is that the gang has to give all their earnings to a random gang. Well, it's kind of nice if you have a number like this, because in this example, all we got to do is roll a d12 and we can figure out where this money's going to, for example. As you can see, I have the gang here. I have the gang name as well as the type of gang that's being played as well as the player that has it. As you can see, I have all my various aliases for my friends because my friends want to keep their identities, private, which makes sense. You want to go about doxing people. So as you can see here, for example, gang number 1 is Precinct 13. It's a Paladin Enforcers gang. My friend Sister Serial plays this game. Now, in a Dominion campaign, you have what are called triumphs that players compete for example. Things like Power Broker, Champion, Warmonger, Slaughterer, that sort of thing, but you're tracking on various types of data. So in this campaign system, the kind of data that an arbitrator is responsible for tracking are things like the number of kills that players have generated over time, the wealth that they generated as well over time, the number of wins they've had, the losses they had, how much territory they control at the same time, what was their reputation points, and finally their gang ratings. So you can see in this situation here, because the information is already readily available here, I could actually add the data to this campaign schedule, so that way my players know exactly what's going on. So for example, for my buddy Dark Lord Mac, he played a Venator gang called Section 8. He actually earned the Slaughterer Triumph because he killed the most people and put most people out of action. He put 53 kills in the process that campaign went on. At the same time, we can also see that we also have the number of wealth that we have as well, the territories that they control, things of that nature. And since we were doing a Dominion campaign, the overall champion was based on the overall points reputation to see who won, for example. So this is something that I would do to kind of track my players and the data over time. I would just type this into this document, update every single week, and that's how I would do it. At the same time, a lot of people wondering, okay, what about scheduling? So for example, for me, since my gaming group and I are very much casual players, where there's no real time crunch for us to get this campaign done, because we just meet up pretty much once a week, and my friends just kind of take turns. We just kind of meet up at my house and we play. I usually have dinner made for them, and we just kind of chill out and play a game or two, and then move on with the rest of our week. So in this situation, as you can see here, I did a round robin style where I'd had like the first half of the campaign was the occupation phase. I broke it down into rounds, and then I of course have my different players playing. So for example, the very first game that we did was player 1 versus player 2. In this case, if you look up here, that means Precinct 13 of the Paladin Enforcers will fight the Red Faction of the Gene Stealer cults. So I tell my friend Sister Sarah and scream in the email, hey guys, you guys will be playing your very first game, so that way they can get together and play the game. And as you can see, we just do that for all the gangs as well, and then I give them of course a week of downtime, so that way they can get their bearings, and then of course do our takeover phase, and then that's how I proceed from there. And that's an example of how you guys can go about scheduling your campaigns as time goes on. So like, for example, if you like that round robin, you can do this. Now, let's say you want to do more of a sandbox option. That's perfectly fine. Just have your players email you their data, so that way you can keep a track of it, so that way you can update your data on your spreadsheet. So this is an example of what I was talking about when it comes to your campaign schedule. This is actually my old campaign schedule from when we did the Underhive Wars, the very first major campaign that we did with the new Necromunda rules. Now, at the same time, like I told you guys, communicating with your players is also very key as well. So every week, what I would do is I would actually send them this information. That's all I would do. So this way, you can see I would basically have all the gangs listed out by their numbers as well as their rank. In this situation, this is by ranking. And what I would tell you is I would tell my players, okay, this is your current reputation, this is your current rating, and this is your current rankings right now in our campaign. And of course, every week it would change depending on the situation of what my players were doing. And by sending this information out, they can actually all see how all of them are doing, how all of them are doing on the reputation, what their gang ratings look like as well, so that way everyone's on the same page. And something as just simple as this, sending this kind of information out every week, is a good way for your players to understand what's going on with the campaign and actually have have a good time playing the game, and at the same time having all the information they need to be successful on it. So that's an example of the Dominion campaign schedule that I would make as well. Now, at the same time as well, I also track my players' data as well. So here is a spreadsheet here. So this is what you can see right here. So this this is the spreadsheet that we actually use for all my gangs and for all my friends who are playing the game as well. These look quite familiar to you guys because whenever you do battle reports, we actually show you a copy of the roster, so that way you can see what's going on. And what I do is I actually just create a really blank roster here. So for you to see here, I just email my friends digital copies of this blank roster, and all they got to do, of course, is just type into it as the campaign progresses. What I have my friends do is that every single time they play a game, what they would do is they would just, track the information down for their after action report and adjust their gang rosters, and they would email me a copy real quick, and I would just use it to copy and paste it directly into this document here. So for example, you can see my gang. This is the gang I played at the time. This is the jury of House Cawdor, and you can see all the information that's listed there. At the same time, this was also Lady Domina's Escher gang, the Killjoys, when we were playing that campaign as well. So she see here, she had all this information here, and I would just take that information, copy and paste it into this document, so that way I can keep a track of it. And that way, like I said before, keeping your players honest is very important because you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, that no one's cheating. And as you see, we go through all of it. We're just going about tracking that information. Now, you may seem like it's a lot of work for an arbitrator to do, but oddly enough, I actually didn't do very much with this. My friends were the ones doing all this information on their own personal spreadsheets, and all they do is they just email me a copy, and I just copy and paste it directly into this document. So like I said, it's very much a give and take. Both of us have ownership of it. Both of us have buy-ins to track that data and to keep that information current, up to date, and so that's one way you can go about doing it. And that's an example of what I used to do for my players and for myself during our first campaign of Necromunda. Alright, so now that we're done talking about everything else, let's go and talk about some potential issues that could pop off during a campaign. One of the biggest ones that's going to show up a lot in your campaign is settling player disputes. Unfortunately, the rules of any gaming system is not perfect. It's just that simple as that. There'll be rule contradictions, rule confusions, all kinds of stuff, different interpretation of the rules. I could go on all day on this. So because of that, sometimes your players are going to have some pretty serious disputes on the rules. And when this comes off, when this happens on the rules, as an arbitrator, you have to make sure that you don't show favoritism or nepotism or any kind of ism at all in a campaign. Being accused of favoritism in a campaign will ruin a campaign. Believe me on that one, all right? Because some people can't handle the fact that maybe you made a rule call or that you decided to make a decision of some sort. They'll think that you're showing favoritism or whatever the case may be. So in order to solve this problem, I like to use what's called the roll-off. Basically, both my players have a dispute. They both roll a d6. Who rolls highest, they're the ones who are going to be in the right, and the other person has agreed to it. And I tell my players this right up the front whenever I do a campaign. I tell them, hey, look, guys, if a rules dispute should ever pop up between two of you guys or multiple of you guys will roll off, and you'll determine who's going to be the one in the right in this situation. Because you want to make sure that you avoid that nepotism, favoritism type of thing. And by having your players just rolling off, it's chance at that point. So you're kind of like in the clear. Your players are in the clear as well because they realize, okay, fate decided this is how we're going to do it, and that's pretty much how it works for that part as well. So whenever it comes to player disputes, this is the way I like to try to resolve it in most cases. Now, another potential issue that might pop up is the players that are in your campaign. People are people, and people are all different, and some people are good, some people are bad, and some people are in between. So when it comes to players in a campaign, my suggestion to you is to play with people that you know or people that you trust. And the reason why that is the case is because you can pretty much get a good feel about how they're going to do things in a campaign, and that's just kind of beneficial for everybody else, okay? Now, not to say that you should never play with people you don't know or allow new people into your campaign, because let's face it, if you never got to know new people, you'll never make any friends in real life. I mean, that's just a good rule of thumb as well. So because of that, you want to make sure that the people you're playing with, are mature enough, they're honest enough, they're committed enough to actually play it and not cause a lot of issues. Now, with that being said, every once in a while, you do have to bring down the hammer. It's just a simple fact of life. Sometimes you'll run people who just will want to run rampant or be immature or cheat or be dishonest or whatever the case may be. If that's the situation, do not hesitate to bring the hammer down, okay? I've actually played in campaigns before, and I've also played in tournaments before where we dealt with cheaters quite a bit, which has always been kind of weird to me because why would you cheat at a tabletop miniatures game when especially if you're not playing for anything like money or anything, you're just playing for fun? I'm not sure why. I guess some people just gotta win all the time, I guess. But whatever the situation may be, in those situations, when that have happened before, I just bring down the hammer, I cut them out of the campaign. You're no longer allowed to participate, you're cheating, or you're being dishonest, or forever X, Y, and Z reasons. Get out of here, move on. Alright, so don't be afraid to bring down the hammer if it has to. Granted, it's very uncomfortable to do, and it can be very, very awkward, and in some cases it can be kind of cringy, but You know, it's your campaign. You're putting the time and effort in. Your players are putting the time and effort in as well. And if some person's going to be a jagoff just running around doing stupid stuff all the time, don't be afraid to bring down the hammer on them, because sometimes it's a good learning experience for them and they probably won't do it again in the future. Or maybe they won't. Who knows? But that's not your problem anymore because they're not playing your campaign. So keep that in mind when it comes to players. Now, another potential issue you might have is adding new players to an already existing campaign. Now, granted, Necromunda is a lot of fun, and sometimes you might have players who never played it before or who've been kind of iffy about it, and they're seeing you play with your friends, and they're like, hey man, I want to be part of this too. Now it's up to you as an arbitrator, do you want to add them or not? It's really down to your individual decision if you want to add them in or not, especially if a campaign is already on the way. It can be kind of complicated, but if you want to, there are some pros and cons for allowing new players in. At the same time, there's some pros and cons of not letting them in. For example, if you don't let them in, you might have just discouraged a person from ever playing Necromunda again, or being a good friend, or the situation may be. So that's something you want to take into consideration for yourself when it goes on. For me personally, I have no problem adding new players, and the reason why that is the case is that you just have to tell your players up front if they're brand new and they're coming in late into your campaign. You just got to tell them, hey, look, you're bringing a brand new gang. A lot of these other gangs and these other players have been playing for a while. They've leveled up. They have more experience, better equipment than you. You're going to be outgunned and outclassed in most fights that you go into. So just tell them that up front, so that way if they lose against a more powerful gang, it's not so detrimental because they're coming in late, you know? So just let them know that ahead of time. Like I said, communication, very, very important on that one as well. Now, some people, like for example, like to do balancing mechanics whenever they bring new players in. Either they give them so many extra credits to buy additional stuff for fighters, or they give them gang tactics, or whatever the case may be. Like I said before, it's really up to you how you want to handle that. For me personally though, I tell my players who are brand new, if they're coming in later in a campaign, like game mechanics, balancing mechanics, and in the Underhive, are you kidding me? This is a game of gang warfare. There are no even things going on in a gang warfare. It's on the streets, and on the streets no one cares if you're brand new or not. You know, you just got to put up or fight, you know? And that's how I tell my players. So that's the thing you want to keep in mind. If you want to put balancing mechanics, you can if you want to, and it's up to you how you want to do that. You leave it to your own discretion. You are the arbitrator after all. It's up to you how you want to do it. In most cases though, it'd just be easier to tell your players, hey look, there are no balancing mechanics. You're coming in late. You just got to try to do as best as you can. And that usually most players will be okay with that. They just want to play and they'll be fine with it. And if they're not fine with it, well, they shouldn't be coming into your campaign late. So that's just another thing you can keep in mind as well. Another potential problem that pops in is power creep. And what I mean by power creep is that eventually some gangs who are really powerful just keep on becoming more powerful as time goes on. And players whose gangs have not been winning, they've been losing quite a bit, will just keep on losing. It just happens that way. And this is an issue that pops up quite a bit in campaigns. Now for my friends of gaming group, it's not a big issue because, you know, we're all kind of mature and it doesn't bother us. We're just playing for fun anyways. But for some people though, it can be a huge problem. And you can kind of understand this. For example, if you had a player who's been playing like 8 games in your campaign, they lost every single one, and there's no way for them to level up to get higher to beat your opponents. That's just the nature of a campaign. That's just the nature of life, period. That's how it works. So like if they throw fits about it, start getting upset, you know, tell your players, you know, maybe you should just play better. You know, that's the situation you're in. So that does pop up. I've had some people quit campaigns before because of power creep, and that's perfectly fine. It's up to them if they want to participate or not. Yeah, it doesn't really bother me if they do that. I've had some players who just, okay, I have power creep going on, I'll just have to keep on finding other ways to do so. It's just kind of up to you how you want to do it. And for example, in campaigns anyways, I usually just tell my players, hey man, you know, maybe your gang is not doing so well, but just keep going anyways, because who knows, you might actually come out on top. A perfect example of this was in our Necromunda Underhive Wars campaign that we did earlier. My buddy Fresh Prince Bel-Air was playing the Iron Sights, which is a Orlok gang, and they were the whipping boys of our campaign. They were losing a ton of battles throughout the campaign. But to my friend Fresh Prince Bel-Air, he didn't care. He just had a blast playing anyways. He didn't care if he lost. He just wanted to keep on going. At the same time, he went against my buddy Scream with Emo, who played a gang called the Red Faction. It was a Gene Stealer cults gang, and that gang was one of the deadliest gangs that we had in our campaign. They were super powerful, really tough to beat. What ended up happening is that the deadliest fighter in a campaign was the leader of the Gene Stealer cults, and he got killed. He got killed by the Iron Sight, which was our weakest gang, and that threw the whole power basis off. In fact, the Red Faction, which was the #1 gang in our campaign for the longest time, actually dropped to the middle because it kept on losing after that because my buddy Scream with the Emo just couldn't, keep up with it. And at the same time, he actually started rising up. My friend Freshman's Relair and his Orlok gang started rising up to the occasion, actually getting higher up in the standings. And so from going from the bottom to the middle was actually a huge achievement for him. So just tell your players to be patient, keep going on with it, because who knows, things might turn around. It's known to happen. It is a dice game, so you really don't know what's going to happen. So if power creep becomes an issue later on, just inform your players to keep on trying and to, slow and steady wins the race. Just have them keep on participating. So another issue that pops up as an arbitrator, a question pops up that says, can an arbitrator play in a game, in a campaign? And my answer to that is, I do. And so should you. It's that simple. All right. It's no fun running a campaign if you can't participate in it. Okay. It's as simple as that. People would say like, well, game masters in a role-playing game don't play characters. Well, a game master also plays all the NPCs and they play all the, they have a lot of other things they got to worry about besides being a player in the game. Okay. So game masters in role-playing games is a little bit different for them. As an arbitrator, you don't really have NPCs per se, unless of course you've built them into your campaign. You're just basically tracking data. So it can be kind of boring if you yourself aren't experiencing it. So I say go ahead and do it. I do that in my campaigns all the time. I always play in them as well because it's no fun to track all this stuff and not participate in it. And if your players have issues with it, well, too bad. It's your campaign. That's how it works. That's pretty much how it goes for me. For my gaming group, though, it's not an issue at all because I'm the one making it all. So they're like, yeah, go ahead and play. Sometimes you might win your campaign. Sometimes you lose bad. It just kind of depends on the whole situation on that one as well. And you're not playing for money or for prizes or anything like that, or unless you are, but in most cases you're not, so there shouldn't be a big issue for you to be playing in your own campaign. So if you're an arbitrator and you want to play in your campaign, just tell your players up front, hey, I'm going to be participating in my own campaign. And that's how it should work. All right, you guys, and that pretty much makes up that issue as well. So in conclusion, being an arbitrator for a Necromunda campaign is a lot of fun. It's really, really cool. You get to play your friends, you get to watch their data, you get to track their data as well. At the same time, give triumphs and figure out who's going to be the overall winner of your campaign. It's kind of like it's like the best of both worlds, both being a game master of a role-playing game, for example, and at the same time being a player too. So it's actually really, really fun. And as you gain more experience and you get more comfortable with the rules and the scenarios and stuff, you can actually start tweaking it and actually making your campaign more interesting. You could do things like, if you want to, throw in non-playable characters, throw in gangs or aliens or mutant monsters or flesh-eating cannibals or whatever you want to throw into your campaign, you can do so. If you want to add alliance systems to it as well, you can go ahead and do that if you want to as a game master. If you want to make rules about how your players have to do certain things or meet certain criteria to make alliances, you can do that too as a campaign arbitrator. It's entirely up to you, and it can be a lot of fun. But like I said before, if you want to start off really simple, nothing wrong with that because everyone's got to start somewhere. And in my opinion, starting really basic and really simple is the best way to learn. And if you're worried about, being an ineffective campaign arbitrator, my suggestion to you is you'll never know until you actually do it. You will actually learn so much more from actually just running a campaign, both the positive and the negatives of doing so, and rules, mistakes, and everything in between. And from there, you can just take that experience, take that information you learned, apply it to your next campaign, and keep on going. And at the end of the day, let's face it, it's a game. It's supposed to be for fun. So if things are not being fun, just subscribe to the rule of cool and do whatever you have to do to make it fun for you as well as for your players as well. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Playing some games, having fun, and hanging out with your friends. That's pretty much what this whole hobby is all about. So there you guys have it. This is my video about how to be a Necromunda campaign arbitrator. If you guys have any other questions, please feel free to put down questions in the comments down below. I'll be more than happy to help you guys out with that one. If you guys want some more videos about like how to run a Dominion campaign or how to run a Law and Misrule campaign or a Uprising campaign or whatever information questions you have, let me know in the comments down below and I'll get to you guys' answers as quick as I can. And if we need to, we'll make future videos to help you guys out with that as well. So that's good for this week, guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this week, guys. We will catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.